Good morning and welcome to the second day of the quarterly meeting of the California Board of Psychology. Ms. McCochran, could you please take the roll?
Akwe-Badu, Kasuga,
Here.
Bernal, Erickson,
Here.
Fu,
Here.
Horn,
Here.
Jones,
Good morning, present.
Phillips.
Here.
A quorum is established.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we kind of took things a little bit out of order yesterday morning because of our heavy schedule with the petition hearings. So we're going to start first with public comments for items not on the agenda. But before I do so, I do want to extend our thanks to the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee, particularly Senator Hill and Sarah Huckle, for allowing us the use of this beautiful hearing room. We very much appreciated them facilitating that. So we're going to move to public comments for items not on the agenda. I'm going to remind board members that we cannot discuss or take action on any matter raised during the public comment section except to place items on future agendas. I will also mention that to the extent that there is a corresponding subject on today's agenda, like the Enforcement Committee, the Licensing Committee, so on and so forth, it would be more appropriate to do public comment for those particular items during those particular subjects. How many people have public comment? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So in order to keep us moving through our agenda today, for each of the members of the public that would like to make comments, we will reserve 5 minutes for that purpose. I would also like to mention to you that to the extent you're going to be talking about anything related to enforcement, so not to mention specific cases or names, except because that will necessarily prejudice the board if the matter were to come up before the board for enforcement. So with that in mind,
Thank you for
we'd prefer that you stand there if you can, but if you can't stand there, that's fine.
I'm fine standing.
Okay.
Thank you for having public comment for the Board of Psychology, and we thank you for listening. My comments for general purposes here are to ask what the board is doing for the Me Too movement. I do see that you provided, you have been providing professional therapy never includes sex, which is a good thing. And you have a new paper here, examples of inappropriate sexual behavior. What I don't know that you have is training available. You're telling psychologists, therapists what to do for themselves. And if they don't understand how to handle themselves, which we know is a problem throughout the country in different organizations, how do we expect them to be able to understand what families are going through? And so I'm asking what kind of training is happening for beyond the, don't have sex with the patient. What is happening to train them? I mean, obviously, I know you have training available, that you ask for them to get additional training every year, and they're required to do this. But are you requiring them to understand what trauma-informed is? Are you asking them to understand beyond their own skin what they need to do and what they need to understand for this movement and for what should have always been, for what's appropriate and what's not appropriate? So I want to ask the board to consider going beyond them as a person and help them understand require training that they are able to go beyond this. I mean, obviously, if you have to provide this to your licensees, that just says how they look at every other case. So I'm going to ask for beyond these books and this pamphlet, this handout, that they understand beyond themselves what's appropriate and what's required. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Kathleen Russell with the Center for Judicial Excellence. We've attended all but one of your meetings over the last year, following you around this great state of California in an effort to educate you about a child safety crisis in the family court system that is being fueled in large part by your licensees. Your licensees are often appointed by family law judges to work in family law cases, and they charge extremely high unregulated fees with parents and children who are sometimes literally fighting for their lives and the lives of their children. And if you watch the news, you'll know that New Year's Eve, there were 2 children murdered by their father in Sacramento, and that was an active custody case. These cases typically involve a parent with a history of domestic violence, child sexual abuse, or drug and alcohol addiction, and quite often a loving and protective parent who's seeking a divorce specifically because they're attempting to protect their children and sometimes themselves from ongoing violence or abuse. Our society spends millions of dollars trying to convince women to leave abusive relationships. And yet so many of your licensees appear hell-bent on forcing children to have continuing ongoing contact with an abusive parent, that their other parent is at the same time being encouraged to leave. This makes no sense whatsoever if your profession is truly committed to healing trauma rather than causing trauma in children. We were very pleased to see your accusation filed on Valentine's Day against one of these licensees for harming a child, and we will be monitoring that process closely, so we commend the board for that. There's an extensive body of literature on domestic violence, child abuse, and addiction, which explains the harm that children experience when they're forced to live with a violent or abusive parent post-divorce, or with the parent dealing with true parenting challenges like addiction to alcohol, drugs, or pornography. You see, many of your licensees are leaders and members of the California chapter of the AFCC, the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, a well-funded trade organization that routinely trains PhD psychologists, judges, lawyers, and other mental health professionals in harmful practices such as reunification therapy, which we've been talking to you about for the last year. Your licensees profit quite handsomely off of these family violence cases, yet they repeatedly place children at risk, not believing the parents who are reporting abuse. The work of these licensees in the courts is protected by quasi-judicial immunity. So if a child or parent is harmed by one of your licensees during a custody case, as we know from our 12 years in this field that many are, then they in fact have nowhere else to turn for justice for their mistreatment except for this board. These Californians cannot sue their psychologist. They cannot fire the psychologist. And worse, they are frequently forced to pay large sums of money to a psychologist that is often forcing their children to participate in dangerous, unethical threat therapies that traumatize children by forcing them into ongoing contact with a violent parent. For 30 years, no one believed Dr. Nassar's victims because it was impossible for them to imagine that a respectable doctor could harm so many children. For more than 30 years, no one believed the millions of children who reported being raped and abused by priests. For the past year, our organization has diligently tried to educate this board about frequent unethical and harmful misconduct being committed by this board's licensees. And I did discover that the DCA has prioritization guidelines, which it has given to all of its boards, and they spell out the different levels of urgency for cases. And I understand that an urgent complaint includes acts that could result in serious patient harm, injury, or death, gross negligence, and physical and mental abuse. So many of the complaints that are being filed with you detail this level of abuse, and I would like at the board at its next meeting to agendize a discussion around what the board is doing with these prioritization guidelines that were given by the DCA in its February 2017 oversight hearing. And sure, and my last comment would be that at a recent meeting you discussed licensees that have multiple complaints against them. I believe it was totaling 50 complaints, and we would like to know what the plan of disposition is for those. When it was raised, you all said that they were pending and there was nothing happening. So do you prioritize complaints that involve multiple complaints? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, board members. My name is Kimberly Swady, and I've spoken to you several times in these meetings, along with the two women that spoke before me, about the crisis that is in family law courts and what your members, your licensed psychologists, have done to exacerbate the problem. I'm going to read to you an excerpt from a bar mitzvah speech of a 13-year-old boy. This bar mitzvah speech was written, by the way, I happen to be an atheist Arab, so you might want to appreciate that I'm reading a bar mitzvah speech from an amazing Jewish boy. He wrote the speech under the tutelage of his spiritual religious leaders, the rabbis at the church, though in the upside down world of family law court, this is all mother's doing, and she's an alienator. This is a made up phenomenon based in misogynistic hate that has been perpetrated by members of your community. There is no such thing. Every time a woman objects to anything that's going on, there's some derogatory term that we're going to use to describe her. This speech has nothing to do with mother. It was done with the religious leaders while he did his studies to have his bar mitzvah. I'm not Jewish, as I told you, so I don't know all the details, but it's a life event in this young boy's life, very critical. I'm going to read part of it to you, and then I'm going to give it to Ms. Monterrubio to photocopy and provide you in detail the entire thing. You really need to reflect on this, because it is something that with everyone I have shared it with has brought them to tears, regardless of their race, creed, color, religious affiliation or not. Just a little excerpt. He talks about, until recently, I was still regularly at my dad's house. He had started to refuse to go. Mother was being blamed for this and told to force him, and he was refusing at 13. Until recently, I was still regularly at my dad's house, despite all the things that my dad has done. It is because the courts have not listened to me since I was 8 years old. And it was not as bad then like it is now. I, quite frankly, feel let down by our justice system because it has not supported me. The courts have treated me like I don't exist, and my opinion does not matter. They do not bother to ask me how I feel about things and treat me like I am a human being, but a piece of property to be shipped to and from my parents' houses, whether I want to go or not. And then it goes on in detail. I have you receive a copy of this and read it, and please do reflect. This is a 13-year-old boy. I saw him outside the courtroom where he was forced to return to his father's despite his pleas, his heartfelt pleas to the court. And he was outside the court, not on a cell phone, but reading an actual book. It was accused that mother wrote this because no 13-year-old boy is intelligent enough to write like this. Well, I will tell you that young boy who physically looks 13, but intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally is a man. As indicated by this religious event that he went through, one of the purposes of which is to introduce males to the world of adulthood and personal responsibility. And he was outside reading his book. And I assure you that any young man that was comporting himself as this young man was, is quite intelligent enough to write this speech without anybody telling him what to do. I'm going to read to you from my daughter's college application. She was 16 when she wrote this. So we're talking about a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. On what issue do you wish to persuade others? What is your argument? You're limited to 150 words. A significant problem I see in my generation is the apparent lack of personal responsibility that has seeped into our culture. People often seem to blame their hardships, shortcomings, and mistakes on forces outside their control. When things go wrong and it looks as if every force in the universe is against you, it is easy to look to every person and circumstance outside yourself and alleviate some of the stress by blaming these external causes, but doing so further promulgates the problem. When others come to me for help, I try to show them how they can first look inward and determine how much of the problem can be solved by thinking clearly and rationally about one's actions. I believe that only when people learn to take responsibility for their choices will we be able to focus on helping other people while improving the world.
If you,
These two, and I will conclude, these two from a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old show more wisdom and intellect and emotional maturity than your members. I ask your members to withdraw from the participation and the legal community. It is inappropriate, they have failed, and only take private clients. These clients by hostage has been a miserable failure, and they have done nothing but harm the children of this country. Thank you.
very much. Okay, so we are now going to move on to the executive officer's report. Ms. Sorek?
Good morning, members. In your packet, included in your packet is the executive officer's report, and just to give an organizational update, we have not had any new hires. However, we have had one promotion. We had an office technician in our enforcement unit promote to a staff service analyst position in our licensing unit. We currently have 4 vacancies. One, a limited term office technician position in licensing. It is pending application review. We have an office technician in enforcement that is pending interviews. A limited term associate government program analyst position in enforcement. This is also pending interviews, and a special investigator position in enforcement that is currently pending application review, and we will be scheduling interviews in a couple of weeks for that position. And I'm happy to entertain any questions the board members might have.
I just have a question. So on your report, it says authorized positions, and you have 2330, and that means we have 23 out of 30 people on our staff. What does that mean?
It's a 23.30.
Oh, it's a point in there?
Yeah, it's like a 0.30 position that we have authorized. And then we have 1.20 blanket positions. We had talked yesterday during the budget report about, you know, paying out of our blanket, the bottom line funds for positions. So that 1.20 is paying for that. And then temporary help, we have 3 positions in the temporary help category.
So how many are we short, I think I'm asking, in those categories?
Right now, 4. We have 4 vacancies at the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Ms. Sorek, and I know that yesterday you started to say it, and I've a little bit forgotten, sorry. In terms of the timetable for the BCP or budget change proposal, does that start for this year or after the budget? Like, when is this the number? I mean, given the number of vacancies, the majority of them are from the enforcement side of things. But you know, in terms of us making sure that we're providing enough support, when does that process start?
Absolutely. The limited term associate government program analyst position in enforcement, this is the one to kind of respond to the uptick in complaints that we've had. And we have already started the conversation with the budget office, and we're talking to them about establishing that as a permanent position if we continue to see the trend moving upwards in complaints because we want to make sure we have adequate staffing. Thank you.
Any other board questions or comments? Any public comment? Thank you, Ms. Zork. Okay. I'm now happy to introduce to you, as part of our proceedings today, part of the management team at the Department of Consumer Affairs. And the people I'm introducing to you are, who many of us have met already, are Christopher Castrillo, the Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Services, and Karen Nelson, the Assistant Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Services. So welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for the introduction. By the way, just Christopher Castrillo, Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Service. A pleasure to be back here in front of you today. It's just a couple days ago, we were right across the hall. We had our director recently confirmed by the Senate Rules Committee for his director's appointment. So we're, again, very pleased to be back here. I think the last time I was down in front of you all, we were down in San Diego. And I was telling you a little bit about the changes over in the executive office with our new chief deputy director, with our deputy director of administration, and then also talk to you about the fantastic team that we have over at the Office of Board and Bureau Services with our two new assistant deputy directors. Wanted to bring Miss Nelson here today, give her the opportunity to formally introduce herself to you. She'll be working very closely with your executive officer, with myself, and of course with the board, and give her the opportunity to update you on a couple of items that we're working on here in the office. Thank you.
Good morning, President Phillips, Vice President Jones, board members. It's my pleasure to formally address you all today and provide a brief introduction about myself and my background. So I spent 15 years of my career in the nonprofit sector here in the greater Sacramento region, having various roles in operations, strategic planning, and stakeholder engagement, and program development. And prior to joining the family here at DCA, I was the Chief Operations Officer with American Leadership Forum, Mountain Valley chapter, and then also served for a couple of years in the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, looking at important issues facing women and girls here in California. So to provide my first update for the department with our Future Leadership Development Program, as you know, it's our program in which we develop the best and brightest in the department, as well as our board and bureaus. And I know that Executive Officer Sorick have had a very special role in getting that program started as part of the steering committee, and also now a current mentor of the program. Also know that you have a couple of your members of the board, not the Board of Psychology, Curtis Gardner and Evan Gage, participating in the program, and I hope that they have been enjoying their time there. I don't know if they're in the audience today, but I do believe they were here yesterday. So I hope that you continue to support and be an active supporter of that program. They will be graduating in March 7th. And then this past couple of weeks, they just met with Governor Appointment Secretary Mona Pascal. Next, I'd like to provide an update on the Executive Officer Brown Bags. And those are in conjunction with SOLID, and it's a forum in which our executive officers, bureau chiefs, are able to network, build some trust, and also have a transfer of knowledge with our programs and boards and bureaus. And their next gathering will be Wednesday, February 28th, and we'll have a formal presentation of the FLD team members and their team projects. So I'd like to now turn it back over to our Deputy Director, Christopher Castrillo. It's been such a pleasure working with him and our team. You know, I've only been in this role for 3 months, but in the 3 months that I have been here, along with my colleague Assistant Deputy Director Patrick Lay, we've had the opportunity to, learn and dive deeper into the important issues y'all are working toward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Sort of along those lines of the Executive Officer Brown Bag, just a couple of weeks ago, we had our first Directors Quarterly meeting of the year, had the opportunity to talk about some of our strategic plan items that we're going to be undertaking here in 2018 with respect to our office and Board and Bureau Services. We're going to be excited to getting together work groups for both licensing and enforcement, taking a look at some best practices across all of our boards to see if there's some commonalities that our executive officers, our licensing chiefs, our enforcement chiefs can share, and help kind of bring up all of our respective programs with respect to those specific activities. So we're really looking forward to that with the executive officer brown bag, our pro rata work group, our directors quarterlies. Our directors pretty committed to having an open dialogue with all of our boards, regardless of what that issue is. And so we're really looking forward to continuing those types of work groups, those types of meetings, and potentially others as we get a little bit deeper into 2018. The last thing is I'm just taking a look around and trying to do a mental check if we have any folks who need to do board member orientation training. But we have set those dates for 2018. Our first BMOT is going to be on March 21st. And then we're going to have our subsequent meetings on June 6th, September 18th, and December 5th. If you didn't catch those, don't worry. We've been sending out updates. We're also been putting together, hopefully you've had the chance to see it, a monthly Office of Board and Bureau Services newsletter where we're covering these types of topics and trying to keep both our executive officers and all of our board members across our programs in the know. So we're always here for any kind of questions, regardless of the training, regardless of the question. Our expanded office is here to be as responsive to the board and all of our board members and, of course, the board staff as possible. So with that, again, just appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all here again today and look forward to doing it again soon. Thank you.
Very much for coming, and I just wanted to say we really appreciate the efforts at outreach and communication that have not always been the hallmark of our relationship with the third floor, but has certainly been with the new deputy director, or with the new director, and with the changes in Board Bureau Services. So we really appreciate that.
Appreciate that feedback. Thank
I
you.
also wanted to give a shout out to Mr. Burke, Jonathan Burke. He's a manager in Board and Bureau Services. He's a former staff member in our office. So we miss him very much, but we very much appreciate knowing he's upstairs as well.
Apologize for taking him, but we like having him. So
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Comment on the DCA report, so if there's any public comment. I don't care, no, go ahead.
I also wanted to say thank you, and Dr. Phillips took my thunder. Hi, Mr. Burke. But I also just want to say that I do appreciate that, and I also want to say just to kind of say a little bit differently. I think we've always had a supportive relationship from the DCA above, so I don't want that to be the thing that gets left off. But I think that I appreciate the monthly reports even more, and everything's getting better and better. But I think that we have always benefited, and I've been on the board long enough when we actually did the search for Miss Orick, and I really do appreciate the support that we get from DCA. So thank you very much, and welcome, and thank you.
Any public comment? Okay, moving on. Right. Next on the agenda is the enforcement report with Ms. Monterrubio.
So my enforcement report is item number 13. And I think it should have the attachment of the overview of enforcement activity, but that may be behind the enforcement committee report, which is item 14. But I'd like to start off with talking about the performance measures. We typically can report those at every board meeting because there's quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Unfortunately, though, we don't have them available until March. The executive office as well as the Breeze data staff decided to combine quarter 1 and quarter 2. That ended in December, so we'll have those numbers for March. And I know that Dr. Horn, you had some concern about performance measure 4, which is the discipline, and it talks about cases that were forwarded to the AG's office and not forwarded. So I'll have that analyzed for you for our next board meeting. As the executive officer mentioned earlier, we have 3 vacancies in enforcement. One is the office technician. That's my intake person who opens complaints. Not to worry though, other staff is filling those duties and we're getting complaints opened within the same amount of time. We're also looking to hire an associate governmental program analyst to help with desk investigations. And then, as many of you know, we no longer have Barbara Tanner with the board. She was our special investigator, and we're looking to refill that position as well. But our investigations are referred out to Division of Investigation, so we are still currently working all of our cases in a timely manner. Our expert training, we had our Southern California training in LA in November. It went very well. The enforcement committee will be given those surveys to review at our next meeting in March. And our next training will be held in April in Oakland. So that will be for all of our Northern California experts. We currently, to date, have received 643 complaints. And again, all complaints, even not having an intake person, are being opened and assigned within the 9 days of receipt. We've issued 27 enforcement citations, and again, citations are for violations that don't rise to the level of formal discipline, but are still violations. Our disciplinary program, we've referred 32 cases over to the Office of the Attorney General for formal discipline, and we're currently monitoring 50 probationers. 18 of them are out of compliance, and 6 of them have been referred to the Office of the Attorney General for an accusation and petition to revoke probation. Does anybody have any questions about? Yes.
I think you said the expert training you have available on, is it only live, or do you have it available that people can access it? Or do our experts have to go, do all the experts have to go in person to the expert training?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Ms. Monterrubio, out of curiosity, the 18 out of compliance for probation, is that pretty typical or averaged, or is this out of the ordinary?
That's probably a little higher than what we're used to seeing. But again, being out of compliance could mean that you missed a cost recovery payment, you submitted a quarterly report late. Those are all violations. So that would mean that you are out of compliance. The ones that rise to a higher level, let's say that you failed a biological fluid test or a new complaint came in against you and it was determined that there were departures from the standard of care, that would escalate to the AG's office for formal discipline, for additional discipline.
Any other board questions or comments in that regard? Any public comment? And again, if you can limit your remarks to 5 minutes, because we've just got to keep the day moving. Thanks.
I'm going to sit down this time. All right. First off, Catherine Campbell with California Protective Parents Association. And I want to thank Ms. Monterrubio. She's taken some time this week prior to this meeting to help us understand this overview of enforcement activity. I think there's so much to understand from this. We certainly need more time, and we're setting up a meeting for next week. So that's much appreciated, because I think there is a lot here to understand. And the reason why you see us coming meeting after meeting when we're available, and I tried to get to San Diego, but my plane was delayed, and so you guys didn't get to see me there. But I'm very concerned. We have many people call us concerns over what's happening in the family court. This is a crisis. And as I precluded to in my general statement, I'm concerned about what is happening with our psychologists and when they're actually complaints against them, where they're going. And I certainly know when cultures are set, complaints sometimes don't go where they need to go. So I don't know what you're trying to change the culture in every different division. And if the culture is set with the board and with enforcement to overlook things, I think that needs to change. And I'm not sure why these numbers are so low. I also understand from this week's meeting that, like, for instance, if you look at this report and you see how many disciplinary actions there are, say for last year, 48, and there were 1,042 complaints, but only 48 disciplinary actions. But some of those are actually that happened 3 years ago. So the complaint could be in 2013, when there were only 643. So these numbers really aren't showing us a true representation because, as we've heard, I believe it was maybe an October meeting, that it can take over 1,000 days for these complaints to go through. And I know there's a goal to limit that. But we're not understanding, and in the process, we're having children who are at risk. We have one mother who advised us that her daughter was advised to be taken from her custody from an evaluator, and she's no longer in her care, but she's cutting and she's threatening suicide, and she's still in the care of her abuser. We have children who are not graduating from school because the evaluator chose not to look at this. We have many parents who do not feel comfortable with what this board's been doing, and they're not going to waste their time, money, and energy when they've been so distraught of what's happened to their family to bring themselves to actually even make a complaint when they see that the board isn't doing anything with the complaints as they think should be done. And to be noted is that there's complaints from the general public, but then there's criminal convictions that are received. And these actually might not be, what we've learned is these might not be convictions. These just could be someone was arrested. And so you received that notice, you're cross-referenced. But if you look and say, okay, well, last full calendar year, you had 39 criminal investigation reports received. The year before that, 50, 72, 2013 to 2014, 133. But if I look down, citations ordered 32, disciplinary actions 48. Are these people just someone who's already been considered, they've been found out by law enforcement? Have I hit the 5 minutes?
No, what I wanted to do was is to pause your time
Oh.
and to allow Ms. Monterubio to respond to some of these things, so you'd have an opportunity to inquire further if you wanted.
Well,
or
we
you can
do
just
have
make
a
your
meeting set up next week.
Okay.
And I want the board to be aware of these are major concerns. And there probably could be concerns of Ms. Monterubio, I don't know. But we need to understand why these numbers are so high for complaints, and if we're only looking, and if the public is turning in complaints and they're being dismissed. Because I have seen personally complaints that have been dismissed that had all the backup and all the reasons why there should have been discipline for this evaluator, and it didn't happen. And that goes back to the culture. And cultures need to change. We need to grow. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to understand trauma informed. And we need to understand, the psychologists need to understand that when a child doesn't want to be with their abuser, it doesn't mean it's because the protective parent said something about the abuser. When a child is abused, they do not want to be with their abuser. And all these young girls, when they were young girls, and now some of them are adults, who came up and spoke about Larry Nassar, none of them were ordered to spend the night with him. And I just want that to stay with you, because you're having psychologists order children to live with their named abuser.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I look forward to our meeting next week.
Okay. Ms. Monterubio, would you like to, for purposes of public record, respond to any of that?
Well, in regards to the complaints that we received, those are the ones that are being filed by licensees, consumers, and the numbers are increasing. We're trying to obviously hire additional staff. So with the 45 cases that were referred to the AG's office, with every complaint, most of them are looked at by an expert. Not all, some don't even fall within our jurisdiction, so we're able to close those in-house. But the majority of our cases are reviewed by an expert, and he or she will determine whether or not there is a departure from the standard of care. If the expert determines that there was a departure, we're going to refer that case over to the AG's office. If they opine that there wasn't a departure, then that case is going to be closed. We are seeing an increase in the amount of cases that are being referred over. For instance, we're already at 32 cases referred, and we're halfway through the year. Last year we had 45. So we're definitely going to surpass that number. In regards to citations ordered, those are for a variety of reasons. They could be for probation violations, for minor departures as well. But again, I just want to assure the board and the public that these cases are being reviewed by subject matter experts. These are not cases that staff is just closing without them being reviewed or investigated. And again, I will have a meeting next week with Catherine Campbell as well as Kathleen Russell.
Great. Next public comment?
Thank you. I just have a brief comment to follow up on what I raised earlier. I did just want to understand the prioritization guidelines that this board and other boards were given last year in February, and just to understand if those are being used in the process that enforcement goes through, because there is a clear definition of what an urgent complaint is, and the issues that we're raising, I think, would all fall into that category. And I would like to ask the board or the enforcement manager at her next enforcement report if she would consider, or this board would consider, and again, I don't know how you make policy changes, but prioritizing these multiple complainant licensees that were discussed at your Berkeley meeting in September. It was mentioned that one person has 4 and one person has 5 different complaints against them from different consumers. So it seems to me these are, serial problems with certain individuals, and I would hope that those are getting priority in terms of the timeline. And I understand that some of this is out of your hands once it goes to DOI. The board doesn't have a whole lot it can do about it, but let us know if it's DOI or the Department of Consumer Affairs that we need to go to request a change in the prioritization guidelines. We would like to expedite doing that and go through the proper channels. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Monterrubio.
When we do receive multiple complaints against one individual, let's say, for instance, if we have somebody who's currently at the AG's office and additional complaints come in, we do expedite those investigations and ask that DOI work those a little bit faster, if at all possible, so that we could possibly include, if there are departures, to the accusation that is already pending at the AG's office. At that time, the AG's office would then do what is called a first amended accusation and include those new charges. And again, if we get multiple complaints at one time, we will assign all of those to the same investigator who can interview the witnesses and collect evidence for those 4 cases.
Thanks.
Kimberly Swady. I want to talk a little bit about this term that's being thrown around that none of us know these people, what their credentials are, what their abilities are, expert. We're entirely too enamored in this country by titles, by degrees, by this, by that. And I hope that 2017 and the Me Too movement and the Time's Up and definitely the Time's Up in family law court, I promise you that. And I'm going to be spending the rest of my life making sure they understand that. Larry Nassar had just, impeccable credentials, as did, I'm sure, all of those Hollywood moguls. I don't care about experts. These people that are reviewing these complaints that are coming in lack the basic common sense that the people that built my house have. This is not brain surgery. People have an innate understanding of what is right and what is wrong. Now, maybe the part of going to the code section and finding the exact code section that governs your behavior takes a little step up. But the common is the very basic gut reaction of, is what this person did right or wrong? I would say most of the high school students in this country could tell you that, and many of the middle schoolers, and probably even some of the elementary schoolers. So I don't know what's going on and how these people are trained, how their qualifications are, and I think this goes back to Ms. Campbell's reference to the culture. I am not enamored at 57 any longer by anybody's title, their degrees, their this, their that, or the other thing. It seems that common sense has left the building and it needs to return. And as they are reading these complaints that they are dismissing, and on what basis we cannot figure out, because I, with my JD and my MBA from the Wharton School, have read them and they are solid. They even in many cases reference the actual code violations that the person violated. People go that far in their complaints. There is a disconnect here. I've said this before at the prior meeting, and by the way, I was with Ms. Campbell in the airport trying to get to San Diego. Apologize for missing that. But we're in Berkeley, and we have said there is a disconnect here between what you believe you are doing and what we, the public, believe you are doing. And we need to bridge this disconnect. And maybe it's over this idea that these experts are the know-all, be-all. Because if you do not have the common sense of a high schooler, then this is not an expert. So please, you need to have this common sense, enter the building again, and read these things properly, because they are being dismissed when they should not be. And I certainly know what a code violation is, as does my 17-year-old daughter, now 17, who wrote about personal responsibility in her college applications. Thank you.
Ms. Monterrubio, do you have anything further as it relates to the enforcement report?
I do not.
Thank you. Any comment from board members? Is your microphone?
I said when we're done, I would like to just bring conclusion to this after what you've said about what the enforcement committee is doing regarding this. Just to sum up what you've already said. Yes. Go ahead.
Ms. Monterrubio, thank you so much for your report. And I, this is not an attempt to go back and forth with any of the public comments that have been made. But as I was hearing them and as I was looking at the chart, I just had a couple of thoughts for you to take back and consider perhaps. Is that maybe it's worthwhile having a legend attached to this sheet to explain each of the items, because that notion about complaints received and when they are, I think those are questions that it took me a while to understand what the format is. So that might be helpful to put out there on our reporting so that the public would understand each of the categories. And the other thing too is I appreciate that we have many years to see the trend, but it may be easier for the layout that we have, maybe lessening the number of years to 5 and then doing a percentage change as the last one, just to be able to pull out the numbers. So anyway, I think it's good as it is, but I do think those comments about understanding the data and to be able to understand what they mean, because I feel like you've done a great job over the years explaining it to me, so I feel like I have a better sense. But at first glance, if there was a second page that described each of the categories, it might be useful.
Okay.
Any other questions from board members?
For clarification, when a person wants to file a complaint, does that complaint cost any money?
No, it does not.
So, so a person without necessarily the financial means to file a complaint will be able to do so for free.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say, Ms. Monterrubio, having worked closely with you for a number of years, what a wonderful job I think that the enforcement department does, and I really appreciate their diligence, their integrity, and their dedication.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You get your reports next. Okay. So, is that okay? Okay, cool. So we're going to go to item number 14, which is the Enforcement Committee report and the consideration of committee recommendations. Ms. Akwebudu?
that you're working and you all are working. We know that. And let me just start off by saying the complaints are not arbitrarily dismissed. No complaint is taken very seriously. And what the enforcement committee is doing, we've been working hard at this for a while. We are looking at the disciplinary guidelines where that's being changed carefully and intentionally and carefully. That we're combining the regulatory change, combining with the disciplinary guidelines and the uniform standards, and that's challenging in and of itself. So, and I'm going to start out with, we do apologize for the length of time that it is taking to do these changes. And I just would like to say that, and we have been meeting in order to do our changes with the disciplinary guidelines. We feel that that's the first item that needs to be done, and from that other changes will come as well. So we wanted to say that, and I also want to say that we are looking forward to a 2-day meeting this month, next month in March, to bring closure to the work that we're doing on the disciplinary guidelines. We are halfway finished with that, so we should bring closure to that by the end of March. So we wanted to say that movement is happening, and we just want to assure the public and everyone that we are, and after, let me just kind of say, there is a process. We do have an agenda because we're looking at also working with expert letters, the letters and all of those kinds of things that need to go out afterwards. So we are addressing some of the problems that we have heard today. So I wanted to say that and to thank the committee.
And I just wanted to add, as a member of the Enforcement Committee, under Ms. Quevedo's more than able chairmanship, that we have had to forego bringing in some agenda items that board members had asked about that were brought to, but we're fully expecting after the 2-day meeting that we'll be able to bring all those materials to you, and we've made that a priority.
Yeah. Which do address some of the statements and questions that have been said today. So we thank you all. And thank you for your patience with us as well. Are there any other questions or comments? Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any public comment on the committee report? And we'll go that 5 is golden rule.
Thank you. I'll take heads up from you. All right, Catherine Campbell, thank you for having us be able to comment on this. I appreciate the Enforcement Committee, everyone who's on it. I'm not sure who is all on it, but thank you for reviewing these. I don't know if they're open to public review. And I think that the changes that are being made are very important, and there needs to be transparency. And if I have missed these changes and they're on your website, I apologize, but I have not seen them. So I think to make this public, to see how we're changing this and how we're moving forward, so the public can comment on the changes. And I will state again that I have seen a complaint dismissed that was very good. And when I'm talking about people spending money on this, it means that they're giving up other working opportunities to work on these themselves. You want to present to the board, and I appreciate the value that people put on that when they present something to you, they want it to be well written. Many people do want to hire lawyers to help them write these. They want to hire experts because they want this to be heard in a professional way, out of respect for all of you and out of respect for the situation. So money is being spent, even though anyone can log on to the website and just write something as a complaint. But And I appreciate that since 2016, the board has been looking into changes. It's very important, and I'm not sure what changes are being made. But I will also say one of the things that I'm concerned about is that when someone has had a license taken away for disciplinary reasons, that they can come back. And we should look at if that person has been allowing a sexual abuser to continue to have custody of a child, and they're recommending that, and they don't see that as a problem, it is very concerning that what if they've lost their license and they want to get a new license, what has changed in them? Some people should not be allowed to reapply for a license if they've had such mistreatment to children. And I believe this board is put together to protect the public and to ensure that they're representing us in a way that patients and the consumers of California need to be protected. And I just don't know. And I know this board works hard, and I know that something's being missed. There is a disconnect, and I think more transparency will help change that. So thank you. And I appreciate the bagpipes with my Scottish heritage.
They're beautiful. Just to assure everybody, when we get done with the disciplinary guidelines that Ms. Akwebudu has been referring to, they will be coming to the board in a public meeting where you'll have an opportunity to look at them and comment on them and so on and so forth.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, after the board looks at them, if there are substantial changes, am I being heard, I hope? What are the next steps? We submit for review by DCA, and then it goes to is this something that goes through the legislature before we can then change our guidelines?
So just a kind of overview of the process. Once the enforcement committee is completed with their review, the draft disciplinary guidelines will be brought before the board for review, which will be an opportunity for the public to provide input, public comment. Once the board agrees on language in the disciplinary guidelines, then we will start the initial review phase of the regulatory process, which is a 6 to 8 month process, going through our oversight agencies, Department of Consumer Affairs, Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, as well as Department of Finance. Then it will start the formal rulemaking process, will be 45-day public comment, and another opportunity. So there are several opportunities for the public and the board to be part of the drafting process and the language process in the disciplinary guidelines. So we're at the very infant stages of the review process right now.
Yes, thank you.
And I know we've discussed this before about ensuring that we have, as much public input as possible and we're transparent. And I know that the committee is working on this. I do think that it might be helpful if we consider, much like we did for the licensing committee, an opportunity to have the board, and I know that this is a different sized requirement meeting, have the public be a part of the meeting, and or the stakeholder process that Dr. Horn implemented. We did through the solid process. I feel like it is something that we don't want to have happen when it comes to the board for the public participation. There'll be those points, as you mentioned, Ms. Orrick, about that, but I think it might be useful. I don't know if I'm no longer on the licensing committee, but I would imagine the feedback that was received during that solid process was helpful to inform the process, not to mention the importance of transparency as a board, which we value, and also ensuring that the public feels as though they're able to have a forum to have it held. And I felt like the decision that we made at the time, Dr. Phillips and Dr. Horn and Dr. Harlem, in the discussion from staff about solid, was that it would be something that we would not be facilitating either, but we would be able to hear it. So I hope that we would consider those ways, because currently the work that's been happening is we want to ensure that we have public participation throughout the process, and transparency is such an important value for our board. I think we could possibly, Chairwoman, consider some other opportunity to have public participation.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. As a member of the Enforcement Committee, people need to recognize that what happens in the Enforcement Committee is not because of the discussion of particular cases that go on. It's not really a meeting that could be open to the public. It would defeat the purpose of the Enforcement Committee. But the idea that perhaps we would have a separate meeting where we'd have a stakeholder meeting with interested parties once we've completed the disciplinary guidelines and perhaps the board has had an opportunity to look at them, might be a very good way of we want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to see them and comment on them. So that's never been in question, I think. So I just wanted to explain this is a unique kind of committee because of the nature of the things that we discuss. And to have it be a public meeting would be to disclose information perhaps about past cases that would be otherwise confidential.
And Dr. Phillips, thank you so much for explaining that, because that was my way of saying I understood that, but I do think there could be a different way. And also, just speaking of explaining stuff, I hope that you didn't do it today, but when we're looking at the computers, everyone, we are paying attention. We're paper light. And so, but I just wanted to say thank you for explaining it that way, because that's exactly what I think, I understand why we're doing it the way we're doing it.
Okay. Okie dokie. Well, thank you very much for your report. And I think we've done public comment. I think we're done with the report. It's too early to break for lunch, I think, don't you? That's absolutely true. Thank you for reminding me. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Okay, after substantially longer than 5 minutes. Next agenda item is number 15. We're going to hold agenda item number 15 until after agenda item number 20 so that we can discuss those in proximity to each other. So the next item we'll be taking up is the licensing report.
Good morning, board members. I'm included in your materials is on your combined PDF, page 70. It is our licensing report. On the memo, we have provided you with our average processing time frames. To go over it briefly is for psychologists as of right now, as of January 25th, the average processing time is 15 business days. For psych assistant, is 4 business days. And for registered psychologist applications, it's about 10 business days. So we are still trying to catch up on the workload that impacted by a loss of staff late last year and also training of new staff, but we're trying our best to catch up and process as quickly as possible. Afterwards, it will be our licensing population, and we have included a general number for our current licensees for psychologists, psych assistant, and registered psychologist. And in your attachment, you see the licensing population report, attachment A on 71 of your package. And after that is the applications number and also the exam statistics. We have provided an updated copy for the attachment C. I wonder if you have a chance to take a look at it. It's a hand carry item.
I don't think you got it. Did it come as a PDF? Oh, so
Thank you, Ms. Lim. So what happened is it was brought to our attention that the statistics report that we ran was have a little bit of mistakes. So thank you to Ms. Snyder from Central Services to make that corrections and provide us with the updated statistics for exams. So if you have any questions, please let us know.
Ms. Chung, I think you've indicated in the past that some of the variability in terms of test results may have reflected people trying to get licensed, given that their 6 years on their psychological assistantship was coming to an end.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps they rushed the process a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that that's speculation on your part.
Right.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from board members? Comments? Any comments from the public? Okay. Mm-hmm.
Kind of want to go back to y'all's catching up piece, because even though you have, it's a little longer time on, from start to finish, it's still well within any time, any time limits that we don't want to go beyond. So y'all have really been doing a great job, even though understaffed and training folks and everything. So
thank you.
Just wanted to comment on that.
The unsung heroes of the licensing department. So next on the agenda would be the continuing education report. Oh, I did say public comment already. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, hello. I just wanted to first report that we no longer have a citations backlog, and I have resumed audits for May and June of 2016. So that's good. So attached here, you'll find the following statistics for psychologists and psychological assistant renewal applications processed, online versus mailed-in renewals. For this, I did want to highlight a large number of psychologists are submitting their renewals online, and so that's really good to see. Attachment C is citations issued for CE deficiencies. And at the September board meeting, the board requested historical information on CE audits. So included in this packet is a timeline of how the board took over the audits from MCEPAA. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have.
So first of all, I think it's great that y'all are caught up and now feel like you're on the road. How long do you think it'll be till you get within a time frame, only a few months after and again?
So I issued the audits on February 1st for May and June, and a majority of them have already submitted there. So I think it's going to be fairly quickly. So maybe in just a couple months, maybe by the June or maybe August, maybe not to shoot so far.
Okay. So the thinking is it might go pretty rapidly.
Yeah. Because they respond very quickly.
Right.
Yeah. We usually give them 60 days. So,
yeah.
And I got a majority of them back.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So for attachment C, where the pie chart for cause for citation, overwhelmingly 87%, as you noted, come from insufficient total hours. I'm curious to know if this is the gap for the insufficient is maybe 1 or 2 hours versus half the hours are missing. Do we have a rough sense of where these numbers are coming in for?
I don't have the exact numbers, but just from the top of my head, looking at it, a lot of it is maybe 5 to 10 hours short. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And I just want to say thank you for the historical background, because I think this was something that we've talked about before as a member of as a former member of the licensing committee. So this is really interesting to see from where we've come, and congratulations on making some progress back to making it more timely.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any public comment on the continuing education and renewals report?
Hi, Dr. Joe Lindercrow, I'm the CEO of the California Psychological Association. I just want to clarify one thing. We have gotten a few questions recently from our members. I want to clarify that when you say you've initiated the audits for May and June, you're talking about 2016. So, year and a half out. So again, how long do you think, just so we can provide appropriate information, how long do you think it will be before you're kind of into 2017 or
2017. I would say roughly maybe by end of summer. Just it all depends on how fast I can get the certificates from the licensees.
Okay.
They are given 60 days, but if they can reply faster, that speeds up the audit process and
Okay.
work on the subsequent months.
Okay, so so if someone calls us and isn't understanding why they're just now getting audited for, it's not even their current cycle, it's their previous licensing cycle. So you're going all the way back to a previous cycle?
Yeah, we're working on that backlog.
Okay.
We're resuming the audits that were where we first left off.
So how long was it, how long a time period was it that you weren't doing any audits at all?
So I got into
I know you weren't here, but
yeah, in May.
that, that's just what happens when you take a position. You have to have all these answers. So
Yeah, I got this position in May of 2017. And
Okay.
since then I've been working on the backlog of citations. So then I just resumed audits like February 1st of this year.
okay, and so again, how long a time period was it that no audits were done? And again, this is just so that we can help provide accurate information to
Maybe
psychologists.
so from May to December. I don't know how long it was before that. Maybe 8 months, 8 or 9 months.
In 2016. Okay, and so now you've resumed where you left off.
Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Can I just say something to Dr. Linda Crow? Also, just so you know, people have to keep their continuing education, I think, for 2 licensing cycles. So even though we are behind, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for catching up on the backlog and moving forward. That's great. I know you had some assistance, or perhaps prior to the time that you took over the position, there was a number of staff members working on doing audits to try to get things caught up. So everybody's efforts in that regard are appreciated. Okay, and now we have the licensing committee report and consideration of committee recommendations. Dr. Horn.
That's item number 18 in your agenda, everybody. And right off the bat, we have pathways for licensure. So we're still working on those. I think they're going to be brought for, let's just say they're still in process. So we've had the stakeholder meetings, we've incorporated the stakeholder recommendations, and the I think we're going to have the final pathway report or items for everybody to look at in May, right? I mean April, yeah. Whenever our next meeting is. April licensing committee meeting. So April 24th? Okay. So April 24th, everybody for Pathways for Licensure at the licensing committee meeting. The amendments, let's see. So the next agenda item, number B, yeah. The surveys that we were talking, oh yeah. Okay, thanks for saying that. If I get something wrong, one of y'all can tell me about it. At the last licensing committee meeting, one of the things, well, is that in here? You're talking about with the memo, right, of the psych assistant? Okay, why don't you say it, because I'm... Thank you.
At the last licensing committee meeting, the committee looked at a proposal to change the pathways to licensure from 4 different pathways. So psychological assistant, registered psychologist, a formal internship program, and exempt setting, to a single pathway to licensure or a potential single pathway to licensure. There wasn't a consensus among the committee members, but there was some really good substantive policy discussions about what that would look like and how that would impact applicants or potential applicants for licensure. And at the end of the committee meeting, the group decided that we needed more data in order to move forward with any kind of recommendation to the full board. So staff recommended reaching out to stakeholders through various surveys. So we have tailored surveys to go out to, did you want to talk about the surveys that are going to go out, Ms. Chung? Thank you.
So we have created 3 surveys altogether. One is with the audience in mind of licensees. So which will be reaching out to all the licensees that registered with, licensed by our board right now, and also stakeholders. So for example, some stakeholders would be some of our school because it might potentially impact their doctoral internship or how they set up their training. We also trying to reach out to consumer groups and anybody who's interested. And also we are reaching out to some government agencies, for example, CDCR. On our list also, some of the example include Department of State Hospitals, Public Health, etc. And we also have one survey for our staff member. So just to get a sense of what their thoughts on to make a more comprehensive evaluation for the proposal.
Thank you. Thank both of you. That was actually probably the one thing we didn't feel like we could move forward with the pathways till we got that. Some of those questions answered, and like Ms. Sorek said, there wasn't consensus on the committee about what to do about that. So. Yeah, thanks for that. So let me ask, well, do you have anything to add to that part, Mr. Fu or Dr. Phillips, just about that piece?
I think we realized the gravity of the implications this could have for training models and those types of things. So we wanted to make sure to solicit feedback from stakeholders regarding what would seem like a real simplification of the pathways would have on the institutions, what impact it would have on other people. So I think the surveys have been Okay, I think the surveys have been a great idea. And I know that we did some work on those recently, and I don't know if they've gone out yet or not, but we will see what happens.
Have they gone out?
So we have received a draft today from Sala, because Sala has been gracefully to assist us with creating the surveys. So we are going to do a final review and make necessary edits, and we plan to send it out to our list of stakeholders next week.
Right. That's great.
And of course, when we have the surveys, we still welcome whoever stakeholders that would like to participate in person in our April meeting. That would be great to have all the stakeholders there to provide their input in person as well.
Thanks.
Could you refresh my memory when you were mentioning the stakeholders list? Did you include local or county governments in that?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just ask on this part, is there any other board comment about this part of the report? And any public comment about this part of the report?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Winkleman from the California Psychological Association. I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment and for addressing this issue and getting more data and inviting more stakeholder input. I may have not heard it, but I think one of the things that was discussed at the licensing committee meeting was also getting some feedback from registered psychologists and from their supervisors. And I didn't hear that in terms of the survey, and I wanted to make sure that data was being collected as well in case the consideration of removing that category, just to make sure that would not have a negative impact on the registered psychologists or on the organizations that are employing them. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Winkleman. Yes, thanks for reminding me. Definitely, a registered psychologist is on our stakeholders list as well, and their agency. Thank you.
Dr. Melody Schaefer, Division 2 of CPA and KPIC Board. With the surveys that you're going to be sending out, it would be great if you can send them to KPIC internship sites so that we see from the agencies what impact this may have and what input they would like to provide.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Yes, KPIC, APIC, and APA, they're on our list as well. Thank you.
Marilyn Imos from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I second both motions. We also have internship, APIC approved internship programs. I'll probably be addressing those as well. Will they also be getting our interns and trainees surveys to fill out? Or is it just for management and?
It's probably going to training directors.
Supervision.
Okay,
good. That's perfect. Thank you.
I believe we're trying to reach out to people that would potentially be in internship sites. It's very difficult for us to know who's in internship sites because they're not registered with us.
Right.
So I think we were going to try to get it to graduate student associations and those types of things so that we capture some of that population in terms of getting their feedback.
Excellent. Also the training directors at internships, like APIC, KPIC, and APA.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a training coordinator. We have training directors for our two consortia and the single site, and we have training coordinators at each site. So those would be people that we could disseminate those to. Good. I'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Dr. Emos,
Yes.
if there are any individuals you would like to make sure we send the survey to, if we don't know, we don't know. So it would be extremely helpful. And for anyone in the audience, BOP licensing at dca.ca.gov. If you're watching the webcast, following along, if there's anyone, we want to make sure as much participation in this survey, the better, because the more data that we have, the better informed the board members can be to make final decisions. So help is appreciated.
We're very happy to do that. I'll send you a list. Thank you.
I think it might be helpful at some point to just show the list of who we might be reaching out to, so that, because it seems like a lot of the folks who come up here, we are reaching out to them already because of the very comprehensive work that our licensing committee staff does. And so it might be helpful in some way if we could post that list and share it with the board members as well, because as you just said, Ms. Ork, we don't know what we don't know. And I've heard comments in the past about, do we reach out to so-and-so? And if we see that list in its entirety, we can sort of just go through that and check any potential spots to add to that. And if we can use social media to help, again, to demonstrate who has received it already, but also encourage those who may not have received it to participate as well, because it is helpful in the aggregate of the information.
My one concern about doing that is if you're going to post the list of people that have asked to be notified, we're posting a whole bunch of people's personal email addresses that they might not necessarily want to have available on a public record site.
I meant more on the organization level.
Right.
So, like, for example, we'll be reaching out already to KPIC, APIC, etc. So just broadly speaking, or you mentioned CDCR. So not the individuals themselves, but some of the organizations that will be touched by it.
Mm-hmm.
So that and if there's a potential maybe of a point of contact for that organization, if that complicates things, that's a separate issue. But I think it gives folks a rough perspective of where the reach of the survey is going, rather than having it come out one by one on an oral basis in committee or in meeting.
So just so staff understands the direction of the board, and I know just for the schools, for example, I helped put together the list of school contacts, and there were about 400. And that was just for the schools. So I just want to make sure that you guys, if you want, 1,000 entities to go through, we're happy to send that. I just want to make sure that we have the direction of the board. If you guys, what you're wanting us to give to you before we send out the survey.
So I think that's helpful to understand that more than 1,000 folks will be receiving it, and for that to be surfaced. And so from my perspective, it might be just categories, and we can collapse them. I'm not sure we want a list of 1,000 folks, but maybe collapse them to the broader categories that you mentioned earlier in your report, so that folks do have a rough sense of who is being reached out to. And that rough sense is we're reaching out to the universe, and that's a good thing, and that 1,000 plus folks. And so that might be helpful. Is that too difficult, or is that?
And do you want that for the board, or do you want that to be who would you like that shared with?
For the board, and I think it's for a larger audience as well, if it's a shorter list of broad categories, whether it's organizations, universities, and it can just state that so that folks know who these stakeholders are. Or it could just be if you've signed up on the please notify me list, which I suspect that's part of it. If you've signed up for this to be notified, you will be notified, and we can leave it at that too. But I think just providing a rough sense of what the universe looks like. We don't have to go into the 1,000 line by line, person by person.
Ms. Zork, I appreciate Mr. Fu's suggestion. I actually think that might be a little too difficult, and as we share it with the board, it becomes a public document, so it would be shared with everyone, I would imagine. Ms. Marks, right? If we did that amongst the board. I think what would be helpful, and particularly since you said and encourage people to send an email if they wanted to be added, I think that maybe that's a good summary report, the categories of people. So in the next written report that we talk about everyone that we did, and the number I think is excellent. I mean, yeah, it's good to know that we're trying to cast a wide net. But I also think that, allowing people to opt in if they want to. And I don't know if then if you have the opt-ins that don't fall into a certain category, it might be difficult for staff to share. And I'm with you, Dr. Phillips. We don't want to share people's confidential information that way. But I do think that it would be helpful to make sure we had it. And I think your suggestion about counties is important. And I know before when we talked about stakeholder meetings where we wanted to get other people in the room, I think it's just important that we language stuff appropriately so people know that they also are invited and are encouraged to reply.
I like that suggestion. And again, I don't want to add more to it. So the broader broader categories or just in the summary report of we have a list of over 1,000 people that have been contacted, will be employing these methods. Please let us know if you want to be contacted. That's fine.
So sorry, not to belabor. So just so I'm clear, the board's not asking for approval on who we're reaching out to, but you would like perhaps a report of the organizations that we reached out to for the survey, and then maybe a total number of how many we sent the survey to, and then obviously the number that participated, to be presented at the licensing committee meeting and then at the board meeting following in May.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
And this is where it becomes difficult. If people sign up to be notified and we don't have any other information about them, we don't even know which survey they should get, because there's a survey for interns and students, there's a survey for training directors and different people in exempt settings, et cetera, et cetera. So if they want to sign up to receive the surveys, then I suspect that they would really need to let us know in what capacity they practice. And I want to repeat that email address in less departmental. So that's BOP licensing at dca.ca.gov. Internally, we sometimes refer to ourselves as BOP, which makes me feel like I'm in a boy band, but
I'm sure that we can disseminate that really easily. We have our contact lists, and so we would be sending it to the chiefs, and we are in exempt setting, and I'm happy to send our email information. You can send it to me, and I will make sure that it's disseminated from headquarters as necessary. I also want to piggyback on the thanks for being able to participate in this discussion at this point in time. It's very important to us. And I just had a really interesting conversation with Ms. Chung, where I realized you get so entrenched in your own organization that you forget that other people out there don't have any idea of what it consists of and what we do. And I'm a kind of a person, I love to write and I love to talk about it anyway. So I'm very, very flattered and very happy to be able to give a transparent summary of our hiring process, of our credentialing process. The other thing is that I've worked in so many of these areas in the now 9 years I've been at headquarters that I have kind of a hands-on idea about credentialing. I'm a specialist reviewer and I've been in peer review. Almost every aspect of headquarters. So this is really delightful for me to be able to present a summary. And then I like the idea, I would also, if some possibility in the future were there, learning about other organizations. I do go on their websites because I'm interested in how other organizations and entities function. But I think it's really good to have this kind of transparency, and we welcome it. We absolutely welcome it. We're also a state organization who has an obligation to the public, so this is a great opportunity to really be able to drill down on something that I think is important for you to know. And thank you, Ms. Chung, for mentioning that. I hadn't thought that far, but I have to say, I guess we've maybe I've been coming here about 5 years. What a joy this is to be able to give our input and be heard. And I really treasure this possibility with the board. CDCR everybody is really well aware of the good relationship we have. And we also want to encourage you, if you need something from us, just holler. We're here, and we want to give you the information that's going to be the most useful for you. So please don't hesitate. Thank you.
Thank you.
for those not familiar with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, that's what those letters stand for. Yeah, that's what CDCR stands for. They are one of the largest employers, if not the largest employer of psychologists in the state of California.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move. Dr. Winkleman. I keep wanting to say Ms., but sorry about that.
Hi, Dr. Winkleman again from California Psychological Association. I just had one other brief, I want to add to the previous comments of gratitude for being able to participate in this process. Thank you. And I also wanted to request that you would consider, in addition to doing a list of the general organizations and categories of people that are contacted, which I think is a great idea, to also, if possible, to consider providing what are the questions that were put out in the survey so we can really have the data. Some of the changes that are being requested are actually kind of complicated and really could impact people. So to just consider providing the survey questions as well. Thanks.
Okay. Just about something that Dr. Phillips said, so that I'm clear on that notion of survey questions, just brought this up again for me. You know, you mentioned, do people have to ask for a certain survey? It's the same survey, and then there's a box to check what category, or it's a different survey. So I do think, yeah, that is an interesting point to make when we're saying people should submit their information. They would have to indicate.
Just quickly, so there's the 3 surveys. One will be for staff, one will be for current licensees, including registered psychologists, psychological assistants, as well as psychologists. And then the third would be stakeholders. So anyone that's a potential applicant, anyone that's in a setting that would have potential applicants, schools, internships, professional organizations, consumer organizations. So I think that pretty much captures that. And the stakeholders will be the largest and the most broad, and that will be the drop down where you identify where you're, who you're representing and what your interests or your opinions are.
Would it be possible to first, Dr. Horn, perhaps to paraphrase maybe 1 or 2 of the items so that we get a flavor of what's on the survey?
Hi.
I meant Miss Johnson.
From top of my head, one of the questions is, of course, we ask them to identify what settings or what capacity that they're serving in, and how do they think that the proposal of having everybody, having all the training to register with the board as a psych assistant will be impacted. So we ask them to rate and on a scale so that we get some more objective response. Yes.
I think is a modified Likert scale.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like a 1 to, isn't it like 1 to 7, 1 to 10?
I think 10. Yeah.
1 to 10. And then there's also an open-ended questions that say what would be the advantages of doing this, what would be the disadvantages. Because part of what we're trying to discern is we're talking about taking 4 pathways and moving them into 1 pathway. And we want to know what the impact is on each of those respective pathways. Because how it impacts internships is different than how it impacts registered psychologists or people in exempt settings. So we're trying to have the survey kind of discern that information so we can determine, because we're still going to have to determine, should all of these be consolidated in 1 pathway? Should any of them be consolidated? So we're trying to get as much data from people as possible so we can really think through the implications of doing it.
And just as a very quick plug, the survey is not long. So if that's any incentive to get participation, it's brief but efficient in hopefully getting the data that you guys need.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're done with this part. I'm glad we took comment here before we move into the request for consideration of, I think all of them, well, I'm not sure. Most of them are extending the time allowed to be a psych assistant. So we have 3 people. And let's start with person number 1. So this person is requesting an extension to the 72-month limit that we gave for people who were psych assistants. And this person has been a psych assistant off and on with some extended. Am I in the right place? Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's okay. I just didn't know if I was in the right place or the wrong place. Okay, so number 1 has been a psych assistant off and on for a long period of time. But there are a couple of issues in there. This person didn't put the psych assistantship on hold at one period of time, although it should have been because of not being able to work. So, but we, as a committee, and there are attachments so you can kind of read the issues involved with number 1. But the committee is recommending to grant the 18-month extension of the 72-month limitation to psych assistant, and is making that recommendation to the board. So I'd like to. That's our recommendation. I'd like to ask the board if you'll take a look at that and agree with our recommendation, disagree with our recommendation. I can make a motion. I don't know how to do this. What should I do? Request a motion.
Yeah, generally, if the recommendation's coming from a committee, you don't have to have the motion, but you can to make it more clear to
the board
to adopt the committee's recommendation to grant the extension.
So this is for psych assistant number 1. The licensing committee is recommending to grant the request for extension. And is there a motion?
I'll move
to that. Okay.
Second. Yes, I second.
Oh, okay, thanks. So now, any discussion by the board?
Bless you.
All right. Do I have to ask for public comment at this point in time? Before the vote? Okay. Is there any public comment about psych assistant number 1? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote?
Akwe-Badu,
Yeah, aye.
Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Boo,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great, thanks. Okay, we'll move on to psych assistant number 2. Psych assistant number 2 is requesting an extension to the 72-month registration period as well. And psych assistant number 2 has essentially been a psych assistant since 2004. And so has been a psych assistant for 13 years or so at this point in time. Psych assistant number 2 is requesting a 16-month extension to the 72 months, which has been essentially twice that long already. Psych assistant number 2 has not completed the doctorate yet, so still has time, still has a way to go before completing the doctorate. The committee reviewed the request and ultimately is recommending to deny the 16-month extension request for psych assistant number 2. We took in, there were a couple of things about this. Well, that's our recommendation for psych assistant number 2. So with that, I'd like to ask if the board, well, so that's our recommendation. Would the committee make a motion and then we can discuss that? Somebody?
So moved.
Is there a second? Thank you. So it has been moved and seconded. Any discussion by the board on psych assistant number 2?
Would it be possible to give us a general idea of the criteria considered or the reasoning that the committee has in recommending one and not recommending the other, without going into all the specifics, but just to give us a sense?
Our recommendation is to deny.
And why was that?
Yeah, okay, well, you know, actually we saw the stuff in here. This person works with a very difficult population and a population that's underserved, and that really did give us some, it gave us some thoughtful discussion about this. But ultimately there were a number of things that went into our decision. One was that the lack of awareness that there was even a time limit, and it was hard to understand how that was possible. We don't know for sure if this psych assistant will actually finish the doctorate, so these are still, you know, accruing 13 years of pre-doc hours at this point in time. And ultimately, I think there was also some thought that even though this is a difficult population, this population also deserves to have licensed psychologists working with that population. And so I think those were primarily the things that went into our decision to deny these.
That I don't think she even showed us proof of having accumulated the pre-doctoral hours.
We didn't have any supervisors verification of this experience.
So it was very hard to tell what was going on, but it was striking that she said, "Oh, I didn't know that." That's right, he or she. I'm just assuming it's a woman because it's there's more women in the field now. That she didn't know about the limitation, and psych assistants have been put on notice for a substantial period of time about the 6-year limitation. So it certainly would have provided ample time to perhaps finish her degree and start to work on postdoctoral hours.
Did the person give any anything why they didn't know?
You have the documentation there. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other board discussion about number 2?
Yeah, I guess my only thing when I was reading through it, it was given the last time it was issued, it was after that decision had been made for the 72-month limitation, and that is what stuck out to me. So thank you for bringing it to the board.
Any public comment on psych assistant number 2? So the motion is to deny psych assistant number 2's request for an extension of hours. Would you call our roll? Thanks.
Okwebadu? Kasuga?
You're voting no on the motion to deny?
Oh, so aye. Okay. Kasuga?
Aye.
Erickson?
Aye.
Boo?
Aye.
Horn?
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have psych assistant number 3. And psych assistant number 3 is requesting an 18-month extension of this 72-month period. Psych assistant number 3 has earned all of his or her pre-doc hours, is expected to graduate in May, was issued the first psych assistant registration in 2012. So it will expire in 2018, October of 2018. So this person isn't at the end of the pre-doc, or the I want to say the maximum amount of time yet that a person is allowed. But this person provided medical documentation for the reason this person was unable to complete for a significant period of time. So basically had to put his or, well, this was a her, her psych assistant registration, she wasn't able to practice, and so we are granting, or recommending to grant this person's request for the extension of the 72 hours. 18-month extension to the 72 hours. What I say, hours? Yeah, sorry. To the 72 months. Thank you. So, that's our recommendation, to grant the extension to the 72-month limit.
Move to
There
adopt.
we go.
Move
Second.
to adopt the.
Okay, so it has been moved and seconded to adopt. Is there any board discussion on psych assistant number 3? All right. Any public discussion on psych assistant number 3? All right, then seeing none. I'm sorry, Ms. Jones.
Question. As we look at this in the future, I mean, in terms of what we redact, do we have to put what the medical reason is? Because in this case, it does imply, from what I read, that it is a woman. But I'm just out of curiosity, does it have to be that way? So I just question. You should do that. Is kind of where I'm leaning also.
I actually raised this very same question about the information that is provided publicly, and have some concerns about that. I think we're going to be talking about that, but Ms. Marks?
Well, you cannot provide personal information about an applicant that ties it to the applicant. In this case, the applicant is not identified. If you would still want to further redact any medical diagnosis or any medical reason, you can do that, and then the issue would be whether or not you would see if you have enough information to make a decision, and if you don't, then you can start trying to sort of gear it back the other way, as long as you're not identifying the personal information with a particular person.
Thank you, Ms. Marks, and I would say, and I'm grateful that you said, Dr. Horn, that you're thinking about it. I would just say that perhaps we want to consider if a diagnosis indicates gender. I think that might be something for us just to keep in mind, because there was a her that's not blocked off. I know we do that typically, the his and the her block off. I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like that should be at least considered, and if the committee feels like that needs to be shown, I think I would respect their professional decision. But if we look at this and we don't think it would make a difference, I think we should redact.
Part of the issue, as I understand it, because when I talked about this, part of the, but I still would like us to consider it, but I don't think now is really the time or place. But part of the issue was that the board needs enough information, but then my concern was, okay, that makes sense, but I don't know that the public needs as much information. You know, the public who's sitting out there needs as much information as the board does. So that we were going to talk to Ms. Marks about it and stuff like that at a later date.
Yeah, I think for the board, and it's going to be your decision, it gets a little tricky if so much of the information is redacted because it clearly will reveal a gender or something else, that all it says is the word treatment. And then you'd have to make a decision about whether or not that's sufficient information, or you're willing to trust that the committee has sufficiently reviewed the information and conveyed what it needs to convey to the board to make a decision with that information redacted.
When we meet in closed session, as you remember, in the licensing committee to discuss these, we have more information available to us than sometimes gets through to the board. So we wouldn't necessarily have to redact that information for purposes of the committee, would we?
No, the committee would probably want that information in order to make an appropriate decision. The committee does not have the names, though, of the applicants.
Right.
So you know.
Right. And nor ideally the gender.
Correct. Nor any of the other identifying information. You don't know who the supervisor is, and generally, I think, etc.
But again, I'm going to say this is something we're going to discuss. So, thanks. Any more board discussion about number 3? Did we already vote?
No.
Okay. All right. And did I ask if there was any public discussion on number 3? Thanks. Seeing none, would you then take the vote?
Quaymanu?
Aye.
Asuga?
Aye.
Erickson?
Aye.
Wu?
Aye.
Horn?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All righty. This is next is psych assistant number 4. Is requesting a 4-year extension to the 30 consecutive months. And the reasons are there in the memo. And the recommendation of the licensing committee is that the 4-year extension be granted for PSB number 4, psych assistant number 4. Had a lot of medical issues and then also caring for an elderly parent, and has really been unable to take full advantage of the period of time that this person has been holding the psych assistant registration. So that's our recommendation.
So moved.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any board discussion about psych assistant number 4?
I think this goes back to Ms. Jones' question earlier. I'm curious to know, when applicants are submitting when a person's submitting materials, do they know which documents will be public and which won't? Do they know that the letter will be public, but the medical documentation will be kept private? Is that something we can check on, just out of curiosity?
Typically, they aware that any private document that would not be public or redacted, so they would have a general awareness of that.
Thank you.
No board discussion. Any public discussion on psych assistant number 4? Seeing no public comments. Ms. Cochran, thank you.
Akwe-Badu,
Aye.
Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Fu,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. And now we have, I guess this is planned to be a psych assistant. This person is working in, as we currently have stated, these kind of supervised experience things in non-mental health setting. And so the requirement is that a person in a non-mental health setting has to send in a plan for supervision prior to starting the psych assistantship. The committee is recommending to approve the supervision agreement plan for this non-mental health area and to grant the psych assistantship or let the person start the psych assistantship. That's our recommendation.
Move the item.
Okay, been moved and seconded. Any board discussion on psych assistant to be, maybe to be, number 5?
18D.
18D. Okay. Seeing no board discussion, any public discussion? All right. So then could we have a vote? Roll call on that? Thank you.
Akwe-Badu, Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Fu,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. And then the last thing we have here, I think, is our last thing. Yeah. It's the required status language that we would like everybody to take a look at. And what? Okay. I keep hearing you, and so I don't know if you're saying something to me or not. So we have the language here for retired status. We would like folks to take a look at it, and then if we are recommending, I think that it be approved. And so is there any comment from the board on, maybe we should move it first and then start to discuss it on this language?
Move the item.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, now is there any board discussion on this retired status language, this new category that we're creating or hoping to create?
A new status. Not
A new
a
status.
not a category of
Okay.
licensure.
A new status. Is that it for board comment? Yeah, Dr. Erickson?
When I had looked through it earlier, and I'm looking again, do we specify if there's any requirement for continuing ed to come out of retired status?
I think we say that they have to catch up, right?
Just a real quick primer on this. The board at the November meeting reviewed the retired status language, and there was a question brought up about what about inactive status, and would someone that was on an active status be able to come in to a retired status? So the licensing committee reviewed the language and got input from legal counsel and staff, And in the packet, the highlighted language that you see hopes to address that question about the inactive status. And I know that didn't address the question, but I just wanted to make sure that that was mentioned in context.
So, but I think you were asking if somebody is in retired status, when they come back in, what are provisions for continuing education or continuing professional development at some point in time?
Yes, it looks like it has to be within 3 years of going on retired. I wasn't clear what other requirements there might be for continuing ed to get an active license.
Those are set out in the statute.
Okay.
So if I can just quickly point you to 2988.5, which is page 96 of this book, which talks about the holder of a retired license may apply to obtain an active status as follows: if they had gone into retired license status less than 3 years prior, they've not committed an act or a crime constituting grounds for denial or discipline, they pay the renewal fee, and they complete the continuing professional development required for renewal of a license within 2 years of the date of application for restoration. And they also comply with the fingerprint submission requirements.
And that's actually cited in this, the same section is cited.
Thank you. That totally answers my question. Thanks.
That's why she gets a big box. Okay. Is that it for board discussion? Any public comment on this issue of retired status?
Hi, Dr. Joe Lindercrow, a CPA. I just want to go back to Dr. Erickson's point because I got a little lost there. So here in attachment A, this is 1381.1, it says to apply to restore the license, submit the form and pay the renewal fee and all additional fees as prescribed in sections 2987 of the code and section 1397.69 of the regs. But you're referencing something different, right? Didn't you reference 2988.5? So I just want to be sure that it's not it won't be confusing about the CE regulations.
I think we might want to say
You might want to maybe add that,
paragraph.
because this only refers to the fees.
Thanks for that.
Along with 2987, cite to 2988.5.
I'm just asking if that's the reference to where the requirement would be that they have to comply with CE requirements.
Pursuant to the section 20.
Yeah, it might be. It might be more clear if you just include it where it says the licensee shall. Just to maybe make it more clear. It might save some work and conversations down the line. Up to you.
So I would just suggest, as we usually do, if the board decides to approve the language for noticing, you could delegate to the EO to work with the legal office to make any technical non-substantive changes, because
It's
what you're suggesting
non-substantive.
is
It's
not
just
substantive. It's just to clarify that.
further clarification.
Right.
Yeah.
You should also know in the form to restore your status, it actually explicitly has a box where you have to check and say I've done 36 hours of continuing education before you can be restored. So they'll get it that way as well. But I think you're right. It's important to be clarified in the regulation itself.
My experience of 14 years in this job, redundancy is our friend and not our enemy when it comes to this kind of thing.
Could you repeat that?
Miss Marks.
Dr. Schaefer.
Before lunch.
Dr. Schaefer, Division 2. Just a quick question on B. It's not said explicitly, so I'm wondering if some people might not understand that probably what you mean is if the person is in retired status for more than 3 years, they would be unable to apply. Maybe there is a way to state that more explicitly.
We actually do say later, then they have to apply brand new.
Where's that? Does it say if you have been in more than 3 years of retirement status?
It doesn't say it like that. Where is it?
Yeah, no, I didn't see it either.
License is required.
I don't have the blue form.
The application.
Well, it is in the code, again, in 2988.5, B2, I believe. Says where the applicant has held a retired license for 3 or more years, the applicant shall do all of the following: submit a complete application for a new license, take and pass what I call the C-plea, pay all fees, comply with the fingerprint requirement, etc. So
that's not on what we're looking at. That's somewhere.
no, that's in the code already.
In the code, but you're not
So-
going to put that here.
Well, generally, OAL doesn't like you just to repeat what's in the statute. Sometimes some minor repetition that you can get away with. So again, that's one of those things. If we want to try to do a one-liner that just points back to the code, that would just be technical in my
With
opinion.
all the questions that come to CPA office and others of people that don't understand so much of what there is, if it's an error of commission, by putting in too much, it probably would be good in this case. Otherwise, you may have someone that comes back and says, well, I read this and I didn't realize I was in retirement status more than 3 years, and that would preclude my ability to move forward in this particular way.
Right.
Just
and
a thought.
And that would just be whether or not OAL would accept some minor duplication
Sure.
of the statute, and we can talk about potentially how to do that to explain, so that at least there's a reference back to the code in that context.
Sure.
But again, I think that would be a technical change that, because it doesn't change the substance of the application requirements at all.
Thanks so much.
And OAL, for people's benefit, is the Office of Administrative Law that examines all of our regulations.
Good. You're the only one that remembers. Don't use these acronyms, which is great. All right. Any more public comment on this proposed 1381.10 retired status? More board comment. Ms.
Yeah. I mean, given what Ms. Marks just said, with Mr. Fu, and I forget who seconded it, change the motion to just add that line to include the EO and instructing the EO to basically do non-substantive changes.
Yes.
I would always ask for a second motion if it's not part of that, to delegate that to the executive officer to make any technical non-substantive changes that are necessary to initiate the rulemaking process. So
That might be a little cleaner, because first let's vote on whether we want to do this, and then let's make a motion to do it. Okay. So the motion is on the floor, and there's no more comment. So could you call the roll, please?
Akwebudu,
Thank you.
Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Fu,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Motion passes.
So now I will ask for that subsequent motion to delegate to the executive officer to work with the legal office to make any technical non-substantive changes as discussed here, and in order to initiate the rulemaking process.
So moved.
Second.
Stephen, I think you say this one. Do I say it, or do you say it? I think you.
I can if you'd like. Is there any board discussion? Is there any public comment? Could you call the roll?
Akwebudu, Kasuga,
Aye.
Erickson,
Aye.
Boone,
Aye.
Horn,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Phillips. Motion passes.
Thank you. So that concludes the licensing committee's report. I want to thank y'all for being such a good licensing committee staff. So
Thank you.
just thanks. We're busy.
They are. We keep them busy too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not letting up either.
No. Let's not depress them on Friday afternoon. So we're going to take a break for lunch now. 45. We're going to take a break for an hour and 15 minutes for lunch. So we will come back here at 1 o'clock.
Oh, I can.
It's the luxury of time. Thank you.